There's a strange moment that happens to a lot of people when they finally start paying attention to their money. It's that moment when you realize that every extra dollar you earn suddenly has a job waiting for it. One voice says you should invest it for the future because that's how wealth is built. Another voice says you should throw it at your debt because carrying debt feels like dragging a weight behind you. And what's fascinating is that both of those voices sound completely logical. Yet when you look at how wealthy people actually behave with money, the answer they tend to follow is surprisingly consistent, and it's not always the one people expect. My name is Daniel, and I probably spend way too much time thinking about money psychology and how people make financial decisions when things get complicated. Because on paper, personal finance often looks simple. You run the numbers, compare interest rates, and choose the mathematically superior option. But real life doesn't work like a spreadsheet. Real life involves emotions, stress, uncertainty, and habits that quietly shape the direction of your financial life long before you realize what's happening. Think about the typical financial situation many Americans find themselves in today. Someone might be earning a decent salary, maybe $60,000 or $70,000 a year. They've got a car payment, maybe some credit card balances and student loans still hanging around from their 20s. At the same time, they're hearing constant advice about investing early, building retirement accounts, and letting compound interest work its magic. So every extra dollar becomes a small internal debate. Do I invest this money so it grows, or do I eliminate the debt that's already there? And the reason this question feels so difficult is because both choices come with compelling arguments. Investing appeals to our long-term optimism. We hear stories about the stock market averaging 7 or 8% over time, and suddenly every dollar invested today feels like a tiny seed that could turn into something much larger later. Debt repayment, on the other hand, appeals to our sense of relief and control. Paying off debt feels like removing friction from your financial life. It's a guaranteed improvement in your monthly reality. What makes this interesting is that wealthy individuals often approach this decision differently than the average person. The typical financial advice aimed at middle-class households focuses heavily on eliminating debt first, almost as a moral priority. And there's a good reason for that. High-interest consumer debt, especially credit cards, can quietly destroy financial progress if left unchecked. When you're paying 20% interest on a balance, it's extremely difficult for investments to outrun that cost. But the wealthy rarely frame the conversation in purely emotional terms. They treat debt like a financial tool that needs to be evaluated rather than feared. Instead of asking, "Is debt bad?" they ask a different question entirely. What is this debt costing me, and what could my money earn somewhere else? Let's walk through a simple example that illustrates why this question matters so much. Imagine someone has $10,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. That means every year the debt alone is costing about $2,000 in interest if nothing changes. In that scenario, paying off the debt immediately is essentially equivalent to earning a guaranteed 20% return on your money. There are almost no safe investments that can compete with that kind of return, which is why high-interest debt should usually be eliminated as quickly as possible. But now, imagine a completely different scenario. Instead of credit card debt, let's say the person has a mortgage at 4% interest. Suddenly, the math looks very different. If long-term market returns historically average around 7 to 8%, investing might actually grow money faster than aggressively paying down a low-interest loan. In that case, the opportunity cost of focusing entirely on debt repayment becomes much more significant. This is where the conversation becomes less about math and more about psychology. Because even when the numbers suggest investing might be the better long-term strategy, many people still feel uncomfortable doing it. Carrying debt creates a mental pressure that's difficult to quantify. There's a subtle stress that comes from knowing you owe money, even if the interest rate is relatively low. And that emotional weight often leads people to make decisions that prioritize peace of mind over pure financial optimization, which, to be fair, is not necessarily a mistake.
Money is not just about maximizing returns, it's also about building a life where financial pressure doesn't dominate your thinking every day. But here's the insight that tends to separate financially stable households from financially fragile ones. The real question isn't simply whether you invest or pay off debt. The real question is whether you build the habit of consistently directing money toward your future. Because if you look closely at people who eventually become financially secure, you'll notice something interesting. They don't treat these decisions as one-time events. They treat them as ongoing systems. Some money goes toward debt reduction, some money goes toward investing, and over time, both of those actions compound in different ways. Around this point in the conversation, it's worth mentioning something important. If you enjoy thoughtful conversations about money psychology and real financial decision-making, this is the kind of topic we explore regularly here, so consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like more discussions like this in the future. Now, let's step back and look at the deeper behavior pattern behind this whole debate. Because when people argue about investing versus debt repayment, they often overlook a much bigger factor that quietly shapes their financial outcome: lifestyle expansion. Many households don't struggle financially because they chose the wrong strategy between investing and debt repayment. They struggle because income increases and expenses expand at the same pace. Raises turn into upgraded apartments, bonuses turn into vacations or new cars, and suddenly the financial margin that could have been directed toward debt or investments disappears entirely. This is one of the most powerful forces in modern personal finance. Lifestyle creep doesn't feel dangerous because it happens gradually. Each individual upgrade seems reasonable. A slightly nicer car, a few more subscriptions, a more convenient way to solve small daily problems. None of these choices seem catastrophic on their own, but together they quietly absorb the financial space where wealth would normally grow. And this is why wealthy individuals often appear disciplined in ways that seem almost boring from the outside. They don't necessarily eliminate every luxury from their lives, but they maintain a consistent habit of allocating a meaningful percentage of their income toward assets. Think about what happens if someone invests just $500 per month starting at age 30. Assuming a 7% annual return, that amount grows to over $600,000 by age 60, and that number comes from a relatively modest monthly investment. Increase the monthly amount, start earlier, or maintain the habit longer, and the outcome becomes dramatically larger. But here's the key detail that rarely gets emphasized enough. The real challenge isn't understanding compound interest. Almost everyone understands it conceptually. The real challenge is maintaining the behavior that allows compound interest to work for decades. Debt repayment actually helps with that behavior in an interesting way. When people aggressively eliminate high-interest debt early in their financial lives, they free up future income that can later be redirected into investments. That transition often becomes the turning point where financial momentum begins to build. At the same time, investing early, even while carrying manageable low-interest debt, can also create powerful psychological reinforcement. Watching investments grow, even slowly at first, reminds people that their money is capable of working for them rather than constantly disappearing into expenses. So, when wealthy individuals look at the question of investing versus paying off debt, they rarely treat it as a strict either-or decision. Instead, they analyze the interest rates involved, consider their personal risk tolerance, and most importantly, maintain the habit of consistently building assets over time. The truth is that wealth rarely emerges from one perfectly optimized decision. It emerges from thousands of ordinary financial choices made with a long-term perspective. It's the person who continues investing during boring market years. It's the household that avoids turning every raise into a permanent lifestyle upgrade. It's the individual who treats financial stability not as a destination, but as a system they maintain month after month. And once you begin looking at money through that lens, the question of investing versus paying off debt becomes much less dramatic. Instead of searching for the perfect answer, you begin focusing on building a structure where both progress and flexibility exist at the same time. because ultimately the goal of personal finance isn't to win an argument about interest rates. The goal is to gradually reduce financial stress while increasing future options. Paying off high-interest debt accomplishes the first part of that goal. Investing consistently accomplishes the second. If conversations like this help you think differently about money, consider subscribing to the channel. And now, I'm curious about your experience with this decision. When you've had extra money available, did you focus more on investing or paying off debt first? And looking back, do you feel like that choice helped your financial life or held it back?